I buried my wife 6 months ago. Yesterday, I saw her standing in the cereal aisle. She was reaching for a box on the top shelf, stretching on her toes the way she always did. She set it in the cart with both hands and adjusted it twice. Gloria always adjusted things twice, said it was the only way to know something was placed right. My name is Leonard Whitfield. I'm 62 years old. I own a building materials supply company called Cornerstone Supply, and for the past 6 months I've been learning how to exist inside a house that used to have 2 people in it. I'm not good at it yet, but I'm working on it. That morning I went to the grocery store because the refrigerator was empty and grief doesn't excuse you from eating. I had a list. I was thinking about whether I needed 1 can of soup or 2. I was not thinking about Gloria. Then I smelled it. Lavender and something underneath it, cedar or sandalwood. I was never sure exactly. A specific combination I had bought her a dozen times from a small shop 2 towns over. Not a department store perfume. Not something you run into by accident in a grocery store in the middle of a Tuesday morning. My feet stopped before my brain caught up with them. I turned slowly. The woman was 3 aisles down, her back to me, medium height. Silver hair cut just below her ears the way Gloria had worn hers for the last 10 years. She reached up again, put the box back, grabbed a different one, same indecision, same small pause before making a decision that didn't matter. I told myself I was losing it. 6 months of sleeping on one side of a bed will do that to a person. Grief makes you see things. I had read that somewhere, probably in one of the pamphlets the funeral home left on the table when I wasn't looking. Then she tucked her hair behind her left ear, and I saw the scar. Small, crescent-shaped, just behind her left ear, right where the hairline starts. She got it 35 years ago when a pot of boiling water slipped off the stove in our first kitchen. 3 stitches. I drove her to the urgent care clinic on Route 9 because we didn't have a regular doctor yet. I held her hand while a nurse cleaned the wound and a young doctor closed it up with stitches that he seemed too young to be trusted with. I teased her about it for years. She hated that I could always find it when she wore her hair up. Twins don't share scars. My cart rolled into the shelf beside me and made a loud enough noise that 2 people looked over. She didn't. I stood there with my hands on the cart handle and watched this woman, my dead wife, compare the nutrition labels on 2 boxes of granola like she had nowhere in the world to be. I didn't say her name. Something told me not to. Something quiet and cold that had moved into the back of my mind in the last 30 seconds told me to be still and watch, and not make a single sound. I watched her walk to the end of the aisle. I watched her stop at the yogurt section and pick up 3 containers, read the dates on the bottom, put one back. I watched her place her items on the conveyor belt at the checkout. She paid with cash, folded the bills back into her wallet the same way she always did, tucked it into her purse, and walked out through the automatic doors. I did not follow her inside the parking lot. I found a window near the front of the store and watched her load her bags into a dark blue sedan I had never seen before. I memorized the license plate. I stood at that window until she pulled out of the lot and turned left onto the main road. Then I walked to my truck, sat down in the driver's seat, and did not start the engine for a long time. I have made a lot of decisions in my life under pressure. Running Cornerstone Supply for 27 years means you learn how to stay calm when things go wrong, when a shipment doesn't arrive, when a contract falls through, when an employee makes a mistake that costs you money. You learn to think before you react. You learn that the first move is rarely the right one. I sat in that truck and I made myself think. What I had seen could be explained. A woman who resembled Gloria, a similar perfume, a coincidence of mannerisms, grief playing tricks. I was willing to consider all of it. I had no interest in making a fool of myself or putting myself through something that turned out to be nothing. But the scar wasn't a coincidence. The scar was a fact. I drove home, went to my desk, and pulled out a notepad. I wrote down the license plate number, the time, the store location, and a description of the car. Then I wrote down what I intended to do next. I was not going to confront anyone. I was not going to call Diane. I was not going to do anything that could not be undone. I was going to find out what was real. The following morning, I was parked 2 blocks from the grocery store at 7:45 a.m. I had a coffee in the cup holder and a notepad on the passenger seat. I felt like an idiot. I also felt like I had no choice. She arrived at 8:20, same car. She went inside and came out 25 minutes later with 2 bags. I followed her. I stayed 4 or 5 car lengths back, far enough not to be noticed, close enough not to lose her. We drove through the center of town and then turned into a neighborhood I didn't recognize well. Newer construction. Quiet streets with mature trees planted at even intervals along the sidewalks. The kind of neighborhood where people put out American flags on the 4th of July and wave at each other from driveways. She pulled up in front of a tan house with a stone path leading to the front door. A small garden ran along the left side of the porch. Wind chimes near the door, the kind made of dark wood. She had barely reached the front steps when the door opened. A man came out. Mid-40s, I guessed. Taller than me. He had the easy, unhurried way of moving that comes from not carrying much worry. He smiled when he saw her. He took one of the bags from her hands and kissed her on the cheek, and they went inside together. I sat in my truck half a block away with the engine off. I don't have a word for what I felt in that moment. It wasn't the sharp pain I expected. It was more like watching something through glass, real but distant. My brain was still processing, still pulling up reasons why this could be someone else, still doing the work it always does when it doesn't want to accept something. I drove home and I did not tell anyone what I had seen. That Sunday I drove past our old church on Millbrook Road. I'm not sure why. We had gone there together for almost 30 years. Every Sunday unless one of us was sick. After Gloria died, I stopped going. Too many people who knew us. Too many conversations I didn't have the energy for. I slowed down when I saw the cars in the lot. I almost kept going. Then I found a spot across the street and I waited. The service let out at 11:15. People came down the front steps in small groups talking, shaking hands. And then I saw her. She came out with a woman I didn't recognize, both of them laughing at something. Gloria was wearing a blue cardigan I had never seen before. She looked relaxed. She stopped at the bottom of the steps to talk to an older man who seemed to know her well. She touched his arm when she laughed. She looked like someone who had been coming to this church for years. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't watching the parking lot. She wasn't looking over her shoulder. That was the moment it stopped feeling like a mistake I was making. A person who had faked their death would be careful. A person who had staged a funeral and walked away from 38 years of marriage would at least have the instinct to stay away from the places her husband might show up. She hadn't done that. She was standing on the steps of our church, laughing with strangers in the middle of a Sunday morning. She wasn't afraid because she didn't think she had anything to be afraid of. I drove home and called Randall Pruitt. I had gotten Randall's name from my attorney 2 years earlier during a contract dispute with a supplier. I had never used him for anything. I still had the card. I called him that afternoon, and we met the next morning at a diner on the edge of town. He was 61, thick through the shoulders, with the kind of steady attention in his eyes that comes from 28 years on the police force. He didn't say much while I talked. He let me get through the whole thing, the grocery store, the scar, the house, the man, the church, all of it. When I finished, he looked at his coffee for a second and then looked back at me. He said that if what I was describing was accurate, this wasn't a case of someone having an affair and running away. This was identity fraud, staged death, financial deception. He said it in a flat, matter-of-fact way, like he was telling me the weather. I told him I didn't want speculation. I wanted documentation. Bank records, property records, whatever tied the woman I had seen to a name that wasn't Gloria Whitfield. I wanted proof that could be handed to an attorney and held up in a courtroom. I didn't want assumptions. I wanted facts. He told me what it would cost. I didn't negotiate. I wrote the check. Before I left the diner, he asked me one question. He asked if there was anyone close to me who might have known what was going on. I thought about Beverly, my daughter, 34 years old, the one who handled the finances at Cornerstone Supply, the one who had taken charge of almost every detail of the funeral arrangements without being asked. I told Randall I wasn't sure yet. He nodded like that was the answer he expected. Randall called me 9 days later and told me to come in. His office was on the 3rd floor of a building downtown that also housed a tax preparer and a small insurance agency. Nothing on the walls except a whiteboard and a calendar. He had a folder on the desk when I sat down, thick enough that it made a sound when he pushed it toward me. I opened it. The first pages were bank records, accounts opened under the name Sandra Holloway, established quietly over a period of several years. The earliest transaction Randall had found dated back 4 years, not 18 months, 4 years. Gloria had been building this exit longer than I had any idea. The transfers from our joint business accounts totaled $1.90 million. She had moved the money in increments, never more than $40,000 at a time, spread across 18 months before the accident. The amounts were large enough to matter and small enough not to trigger the kind of automatic flags that catch people who don't know what they're doing. Gloria had known what she was doing. I turned to the next section, property records. The tan house with the stone path was registered to Sandra Holloway, purchased outright 14 months ago, no mortgage, paid in full. Behind that were utility records, insurance filings, a driver's license issued in the name Sandra Holloway with Gloria's photograph on it, and a social security record that Randall had cross-referenced against public databases. The identity had been constructed carefully, piece by piece, over years. Near the back of the folder were phone records, regular calls between Gloria's old cell number, the one I thought had gone dark after the accident, and Beverly's personal cell. Not just before the accident, after. During the 6 months I had spent alone in that house, believing I was a widower, my daughter had been in contact with her mother. I closed the folder and set it on the desk. Randall didn't say anything. He had worked enough of these cases to know when a person needed a minute. I asked him if what he had found was enough to take to an attorney. He said it was more than enough. He said the identity fraud alone carried federal charges. He said the financial transfers, given that Gloria had been a co-owner of Cornerstone Supply with signing authority, would likely qualify as wire fraud and theft from a business partnership. He said it in the same flat voice he used for everything, not unkind, just direct. I thanked him, picked up the folder, and drove to Beverly's apartment. She lived 20 minutes from me in a 2-bedroom unit on the 2nd floor of a converted building near the river. She had moved there 3 years ago after her engagement ended. I had helped her carry boxes up the stairs. I had eaten dinner at her table a dozen times since Gloria died, sitting across from her while she asked me how I was sleeping and whether I was eating enough. She answered the door in jeans and a sweatshirt, her hair pulled back. She looked at my face and something shifted in her expression before I said a word. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lead with the folder. I pulled out my phone and showed her the photograph I had taken from my truck, the one of Gloria walking toward the tan house with the grocery bags. I asked her to tell me who that was. Beverly looked at the photo for a long time. She didn't say it wasn't her mother. She didn't tell me I was confused or that grief was doing something to my head. She sat down on the couch and put both hands over her face. She talked for close to an hour. She told me Gloria had come to her 3 years ago and said the marriage was over. Said she had been unhappy for a long time. Said she needed a way out that didn't cost everything. That a divorce would destroy the business, take years, leave both of them with less than half of what they'd built. She told Beverly she had a plan and that she needed her help with some of the paperwork. Beverly said she thought she was protecting her mother. She said she had convinced herself it wasn't really hurting anyone. I asked her if she had understood that a man was going to die in a hospital under my name so that her mother could walk away clean. She said she hadn't known how far it had gone until after the accident. By then, she said it was too late to undo it without destroying everyone. I looked at my daughter sitting on that couch and I tried to find the right thing to feel. I couldn't. There were too many things at once and none of them were simple. I told her I needed to speak with my attorney and that I would be in touch. I told her not to contact her mother. I picked up the folder from the coffee table where I had set it and I walked to the door. She called after me. She said she was sorry, that she had told herself so many times that she was going to tell me and that she never did. I didn't answer. I closed the door behind me and walked down the stairs to my truck. Nadine Woolsey had been practicing law for 22 years. Her office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown, clean and spare, nothing decorative except a single framed photo of a mountain range on the wall behind her desk. She reviewed Randall's folder without speaking for nearly 15 minutes while I sat across from her. When she set it down, she looked at me the way a doctor looks at a patient after reading test results. She said what I was describing was a criminal conspiracy. The identity fraud was federal. The financial transfers, given that Gloria had been a co-owner of Cornerstone Supply with full signing authority, met the threshold for wire fraud and business asset theft. The staged death, involving a third party dying under my wife's identity, added a layer that she said she hadn't seen more than twice in her career. I asked her what she needed from me to move forward. She said documentation was strong, but that a direct confirmation from someone inside the conspiracy would make the case airtight. She said Beverly's testimony would be significant. She also said there was another angle worth considering. Cornerstone Supply's complete financial records, the internal ledgers showing exactly how the transfers had been structured and authorized, were stored at the main warehouse. Beverly had access, more than access. As the financial manager, she had signing authority and would be the natural point of contact for any outside party requesting a records review. Nadine suggested a straightforward approach. She would present herself to Beverly as a potential investor conducting due diligence on a possible acquisition of a share of Cornerstone Supply. A routine records request, nothing unusual for a business of that size. Beverly had no reason to expect anything. She would compile the financial history, sign the verification forms as the authorized representative of the company, and hand over everything a prosecutor would need to trace every dollar Gloria had moved. I asked Nadine if Beverly would face additional charges for cooperating in the document handover without knowing its purpose. Nadine said no. She said Beverly had already exposed herself through her earlier involvement and that voluntary cooperation, even unknowing cooperation, would more likely help her than hurt her when the time came. I told Nadine to go ahead. The meeting between Nadine and Beverly happened 3 days later. I wasn't there. Nadine called me that evening and told me Beverly had been professional, thorough, and completely unaware of what she had just provided. She had signed the verification forms without hesitation. She had walked Nadine through the financial history herself, explaining the structure of the accounts, the transfer authorizations, the timeline. By the time Beverly realized what she had submitted, it would already be in the hands of the district attorney. Nadine filed the complaint the next morning. The DA's office accepted the case by mid-afternoon. She called me at 4:30 and read me the charges in order: identity fraud, wire fraud, theft of business assets, conspiracy to stage a death using a falsified identity. I listened to the list and did not feel the satisfaction I thought I would feel. I felt tired in a way that was different from the tired I had been carrying for 6 months. That evening I drove to the tan house with the stone path. I parked directly in front this time. I didn't sit in the truck. I walked up the path, past the wind chimes, and rang the bell. The man answered. Victor. Up close, he looked younger than I had estimated from the truck. He had an open, relaxed face and the slightly cautious expression of someone who isn't expecting a stranger at his door on a weeknight. I told him I needed to speak with Sandra. I said it was urgent. He called back into the house. I heard her footsteps on a wood floor. She appeared behind him in the doorway and went completely still when she saw me. I held out the envelope. I told her it contained legal documents and that she needed to read them. She took it with both hands. She opened the flap and pulled out the first page. I watched her eyes move across it. I watched her jaw tighten. I watched the color leave her face the way water leaves a glass when it tips. Victor was looking at her now instead of me. He asked what was going on. She didn't answer him. I looked at him and told him her name was not Sandra Holloway. I told him we had been married for 38 years. The silence that followed was long enough that the wind chimes behind me made a sound. Victor turned to her. He asked her if it was true. He asked in the voice of someone who already knew the answer but needed to hear it said out loud. She looked at me instead of him. She said my name, not Sandra's name for me. Not whatever she had been calling me in the story she'd told him. She said Leonard. She said she could explain. I told her she had explained enough. I told her she had made her choices and that the consequences of those choices were in the envelope in her hands. I turned and walked back down the stone path. Behind me, I heard her say my name again. Then I heard Victor's voice, lower, asking her something I couldn't make out. Then nothing except the sound of the wind chimes and faint in the distance, the first wail of a siren turning onto the street. I got in my truck and I drove away before they arrived. The call came the next morning at 7:10. It was Nadine. She told me Gloria had been taken into custody without resistance the previous evening. The accounts under the Sandra Holloway name had been frozen overnight. The DA's office was moving quickly, she said, because the federal identity fraud component gave them jurisdiction they didn't have to argue for. I thanked her and hung up. My phone started ringing 40 minutes later, Beverly 3 times in a row. Then a text from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in 2 years asking if I had seen the news. I set the phone face down on the kitchen table and made a second cup of coffee. I had known this moment was coming for 2 weeks. I had prepared for it the way I prepare for most things, by thinking through what needed to be done and then doing it without a lot of ceremony. But sitting in that kitchen with the phone buzzing against the table, I noticed something I hadn't expected. I didn't feel relieved. I didn't feel the release I thought 6 months of grief and 2 weeks of quiet investigation had earned me. What I felt was a specific kind of stillness, the way a room feels after a long argument finally ends and both people have left. The legal process moved steadily over the following weeks. The $1.9 million in transferred assets was flagged for recovery and redistribution by the court. Cornerstone Supply's financial records, the same ones Beverly had handed over to Nadine, formed the backbone of the prosecution's case. Gloria's attorney entered a not guilty plea, but Nadine told me the evidence was extensive enough that a trial would most likely end the same way regardless. Beverly accepted a cooperation agreement in exchange for her full testimony and the documentation she had provided. The DA agreed to reduce her charges. She was sentenced to 3 years of supervised probation, a fine, and mandatory cooperation with the ongoing financial investigation, no prison time. I had told Nadine I wasn't looking to put my daughter in a cell. I was looking for the truth to be on record and for the people who had buried it to be accountable for doing so. Beverly called me the week after her sentencing. I let it ring twice before I answered. She said she was sorry. She said it the way people say things when they have run out of other words, not as an excuse, just as a fact. I believed her. Believing her didn't change what had happened, but it mattered in a different way. It meant she understood the cost. I told her I loved her. I told her that hadn't changed. I also told her that love and consequence were 2 separate things and that she was going to have to carry both of them for a while. She said she understood. For once, she didn't try to fill the silence after I finished talking. We stayed on the line for a few seconds without speaking and then said goodbye. I did not go to Gloria's trial. I had made that decision early and I didn't revisit it. There was nothing she could say in a courtroom that would rewrite what I already knew. I didn't need to watch it happen. I needed it to happen, and it did. The house felt different after all of it settled. Not lighter exactly, but more honest. Like the walls had stopped pretending. I repainted the back porch that spring, a color I had picked myself without asking anyone's opinion. I started going to an early service on Sunday mornings at a church across town, one where nobody knew me yet. I had coffee with two old friends I had let drift during the years when the business and the marriage had taken up all the available space. Cornerstone Supply kept running. Some days I thought about what it would look like to sell it and start something smaller. Other days I thought I'd run it until I couldn't anymore. I hadn't decided. That felt fine. Not every question needs an answer by a specific date. I still drove past that grocery store sometimes, not to remember it, just because it was on the way. The cereal aisle was an aisle. The parking lot was a parking lot. The thing that happened there was the beginning of something I had to walk all the way through, and I had walked through it. That was enough. I'm not telling this story because I want anyone to feel sorry for me. I made it through. A lot of men I know would have made different choices at different points along the way. Louder choices, harder ones. I don't judge that. Everyone finds out what they're made of in their own way. What I know is this. The morning I stood in that store and smelled that perfume and saw that scar, something in me said, pay attention. Not the grief, not the wishful thinking. Something steadier than that. Something that had been keeping score even when I wasn't. If you're reading this and something in your gut has been trying to get your attention, don't talk yourself out of it. Get the facts. Do it quietly. Do it right. You don't have to blow anything up. You just have to stop looking away. That's where it starts.